I haven't really planned anything, obviously, or not obviously, because some people plan, and there are two types of people, according to a guy called G.D.H. Cole. There are planners, A's or B's. They're anarchists or bureaucrats. And that's probably a little oversimplification, obviously, although he did write a lot of books. But if you think of it as a continuum, and, where are you? Are you closer to the B's or are you closer to the A's? I'm definitely closer to the A's. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. But anyway, that means that when I talk, I have got some ideas, but broadly speaking, I can talk nonsense. So I'm going to try and be informative. But the main thing I want to start by saying is that if you want to interrupt at any time, I'll just say, can we talk a bit more about this? Because you are banging on about Ibsen or I don't know, locality or something, then please interrupt. So I want to start with this little demonstration. This is what I think you need. I don't know whether a solo artist or a company, but I think you need these things. You need a drill. Well, that's a drill bit, obviously, but it's symbolic I suppose it's symbolic of work to me. I don't know whether you can see that camera bit. It's a Phillips head there. And obviously you need money. You need money, there's money. And interesting enough, those of you who are observant will see that's a euro. So that means something. That means you should look to other markets other than our own. So you need to look outside of Wales. And then you need organisation. So if you're a company or beginning as a company, then you need to know who's good at what. So that's kind of about division of labour. And finally, there's this lovely thing here, and that's obviously emblematic of work and hard work and toil and stuff like that. But it's also, in my view, emblematic of knowing where you are. So whether you're in Bristol or Northamptonshire and you want to find out about Northamptonshire's role in shoe manufacture or Bristol's role in slavery or Wales's role in slavery and coal, then it's good to start with where you are. So you need to put all those things in a pot, and a bit like making a good kedgeree or making some kind of crazy brew. Hope that it comes out in an edible, drinkable way. So you've got to get the ingredients right. Oh, God. It wasn't a good idea, that was it, really. I'll just say, before I sort of talk about artists and how we support them currently, I suppose I'll say that that I think it's okay to accept accidents in your maybe it's an accident that you've arrived here and you've had some really good advice about evaluation and accounts, or maybe you planned it for weeks ahead, or like Barbara's just arrived and she'll go, what's going on? But suddenly, doors open up. So I think it's good in the beginning and even now, the principle of allowing accidental projects or accidental inspiration into what you're doing is, for me, really important. And so we have a totally open door policy here, so anyone can come in and waste our time if we're not wasting our time ourselves, or they can inspire us and suggest, hey, haven't you read this new translation of Lorca which I'm working on, or like Betty Ray Watkins from the Valleys came and said, here's my uncle's manuscripts about a year and a half ago when we were across the road, and out of that came Black Stuff. So for me, accidents are important. So it was accidental that Volcano became a theatre company, because my first degree was in, my doctorate's in politics, and Fern, who set the company up with me, she did psychology, and we really were more interested in, we were both came from a kind of very, sporting kind of background, so, and really were puzzled about theatre and why it was less inspiring than sport, I guess. And so we set out to try and make some work that was primitive and ugly and not particularly good, I'm sure, that was as exciting to us as athletics or karate or boxing or something like that. So I guess, that kind of idea, which also is about looking at other, not necessarily art forms for inspiration, but that kind of idea of looking elsewhere to inform your practice is still something I'm quite passionate about, really. I didn't, to be indiscreet, I suppose. I tend to take a step backwards when someone tells me where they trained, and whether that's an accountant or someone who's an actor. So anyway, going back to prehistory, our first kind of imperative really was to make work, to make shows, and I was just talking to one of you now about, and we made shows and we felt like we had to tour them, but we also had other jobs, so we were in educational establishments or stuff, but we weren't funded to tour. In fact, it's odd that we'd been funded now as an RFO for some time, about a decade, I think. But the first organisation to fund us was Northwest Arts, because we did loads of work in and around Manchester, and then it was actually the British Council, and then Arts Council of England, and then finally Arts Council of Wales. So on a project basis, but all of that was predicated on touring, really, and as I said just now, I feel like. I still get an itch about when one makes a piece of work that I feel, I don't know whether it's some sort of democratic imperative that, I don't like just making it for 20 people. I feel like, you've made it, you've worked hard at it and you change the work and the work changes as a consequence of being seen by more and more people. So that's obviously tiring, and you've got to enjoy life in a Ford Transit or some other kind of four-wheel vehicle, unless you can move around on trains. But I feel quite strongly about that. So that's kind of the model that we work to, which is probably quite old-fashioned now, and some people talk about touring as if it's constantly in crisis and it's constantly impossible. I'm not sure about that. But we were essentially a peripatetic touring theatre company, and we weren't building based, and we've only been building based for the last 4 years, perhaps 3.5. And the first, so we had basically had a house, and then we had an office next to an accountant's, and then we had a building across the road which has just been demolished, and then we moved in here in January. So this building is owned by a housing association across the road, and we've got quite a short lease agreement for 4 years. And interestingly enough, in Wales, housing associations are the places where you can do most deals, as far as I can see, because they own quite a lot of property, and they've also got an understanding of meanwhile use, about a building being empty and being able to use it in a way that some councils don't have. So they're big and important, and sometimes sympathetic players in using empty buildings and spaces. Whereas, anyway, that's by the by. So, anything about that past, ancient history? I'm pretty good on medieval period. I'm hopeless on pre-medieval. Excellent on modern, postmodern.
When you first started touring, how many people did you have touring, like the first couple of shows?
The first shows? Yeah, it's a good question. 4. Yeah.
It's like actors, technicians?
No, I mean, that's another thing that, I'm trying to think of an interesting parallel. Yeah, the fishing industry is an interesting industry to study because obviously it's as we've overfished and as quotas have been imposed, manpower primarily on trawlers has gone down because of this, and also because technology has got more sophisticated, so we can catch less fish without using as many people to catch them. The opposite has happened in theatre. So when we first toured with 4 people or 3 people or made a show with 2, those 2 people did everything. But I didn't even know what a stage manager was, or an assistant stage manager, or whatever they call project people who I mean, that's kind of a vocabulary sometimes that I struggle with sometimes. So the idea of basically the actors have to do everything, which obviously is painful, which is why I'm stooped and coughing. And I still like that. I'm still personally, I'm still drawn to actors knowing how to put on projectors, or suddenly if you can't use the equipment that you're making the performance by, then aren't you disempowering yourself? If actors aren't articulate, then what happens? Someone speaks on their behalf. If theatre makers aren't articulate, what you need is a whole layer of academics to explain what they're doing. That somehow feels unsatisfactory to me. No, we'd never, maximum for us would be 5 people. So I mean that's a good. I think it's a good maxim for starting out, is keeping it small. And small is beautiful, because otherwise all your time is spent organising the team. So it is nice. Of course, it's great to have a big cast, but then all your costs go up, as I'm sure you've been talking about. Your touring costs especially go through the roof. So it seems to me axiomatically the case that if you can't do it with 2 or 3 people, you're unlikely to be able to do it with 10 or 12. But that might not be true. There may be people who are more accomplished at, there might be some organisational thing there that I don't understand. I think there's something kind of deeper about that question though, Liam, and it's sort of, it might not be appropriate to talk about it because it might slide us into therapeutic family governance, because it's slightly about theatre reproducing the either matriarchal or patriarchal structures of the family, because really it kind of starts that way in a healthy, unhealthy way. So and maybe all this thing about theatre getting more complicated and more organised is actually all about dragging theatre out of this kind of prototype of the damaged, healthy family and into, theatre becoming like, an adjunct of Virgin Media, like a management structure, which everyone knows what they're doing. Maybe that's better than, a post-Freudian family. But that's so that's why that's why I felt small was good costs, and also maybe it was doing something more personal. But I think the key thing about small is that it early on for us it didn't just mean that you kept on going, oh well, we've got another, I don't know, one-man show about Frankenstein, or one-man show about the Berlin Olympics in 1936, and you go, does that really add up? But it meant that you were light on your feet, but also and you could present your organisation to people like the British Council, but it also meant that you could look for partnerships. It didn't mean that you were stuck, with your brothers and sisters going, oh God, I've got to get out of this family theatre relationship. It meant that you could go to, I don't know, in our case we did work in Seville and Germany, and we could, we were seen as an easy partner to larger families.
Could you talk a bit more about that? Because I think that's quite interesting how you as a company have formed those relationships to enable you to go out and work, to take your work elsewhere. I mean, 10 years ago was a really different time to now.
Yeah.
There was a lot more money around.
Yeah.
Then how did you start that off, and how have you managed to sustain it? I think it'd be interesting to know.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure we've managed to sustain it. That's the first. To keep it as a there's lots of conversations that go on, but you're absolutely right, Ruth. Because there's less money, they stay as conversations. Whereas before, although we did have a bunch of Europeans in this room doing a show 2 weeks ago. Well, this becomes like it is a bit more medieval. I don't know. I was quite obsessed with. I think you have to have an interest. So my interest was communism, and in 1988 you could still go to a communist regime. So I decided I'd go to East Germany, to Jena, which is the home of Carl Zeiss lenses and all that stuff. And there, they had a theatre practice and department. It's close to Weimar, which is the home of all sorts of things. And we just proposed to the British Council that that there should be links between. There was a link at the time between Sussex University and Jena University at an academic level, and so we just got, I think, enough money to drive to Jena in a transit van. So and we employed 2 guys from Manchester and us to do that, and so it was really as simple as that. I mean, it must have been more complicated, but I think we just felt passionate about we needed to understand that world before it collapsed. A year later it did, but once we'd made those links, as the wall was falling down, we went back. So I would say, without it being a kind of sort of a kind of voluntarist thing, me going, well, we chose to do it and we did it. Sounded a bit like Paisley. There was more work around in that case. So there was a fantastic Spanish company called Atalaya from Sevilla, and they'd been to London and we'd seen their work, and we just said, hey, we'd like to come over and do some work with you. They said, oh, all right. So there was more of an openness, but you saw that kind of work. You saw more of that work in Chapter then than you do now. So you're able to see stuff, and then just talk to people after. It's like a case of talking to people in the bar afterwards. So we also did loads of work in Yugoslavia, and as a consequence of a Croatian coming over to Wales. I mean, maybe it's about reconfiguring the kind of the ecology of organisations, theatre organisations in Wales and England, because as they've grown, they've grown in one way, but been eradicated in another way. So, in other words, there's more independent, small organisations that weren't mediated, so you could go to directly, and so that's what we started to do. Does that make sense? Is that anywhere?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's interesting. I'm just thinking about the people that are here this afternoon, and if they were interested in doing something like that. If there was a group of people here interested in going to work with the refugees that are arriving in Greece, where do you start if you
Yeah.
want to do something like that? You've got lots of experience in that. It'd be interesting to know.
I mean, my sense is that small organisations from, excuse me, I mean, from National Theatre of Wales to Gened Lythal to us, if someone writes to you or comes to you, you don't ignore them. I think, you just kind of go, well, we can't do that, or yes, we can. Obviously, there's there's an exchange of money involved in any of those kind of conversations, then it becomes different. But if it's just like, hey, do you want to come and work here? Then most organisations go, okay. I don't think that's my sense of it. I mean, it's probably hopelessly optimistic, but I don't know. That was my experience of it. I guess this sort of goes back to what you asked, your point, Liam, but it relates to this, is that we probably weren't paying equity minimum. I think it's safe to say, but we were paying, everyone was paid, and we made a commitment within our organisation to pay ourselves every week. We were a cooperative initially, and then moved out of that just because we couldn't get hold of the bank was just driving us nuts. So, yeah, I think it's a combination of from you people to be brave enough to ask, but also the fact that there was more openness. I mean, I'm not kind of trying to pretend that the context has changed. It has changed, and I think there's a kind of, I was talking to John about this actually, about that appetite for risk, and there's a lack of, the appetite for risk is kind of gone. People are constantly talking about the kind of special diets they've got now. I'm now kind of joking really, but for me it's like to find people who have the same kind of appetite for risk as us is important. So, but also is not to go, I've got to have an appetite for risk, because Paul said, if you go, Christ, I really, I'm not, that's not where I am. But for me, when this doesn't apply to Erodim, but certainly for actors I employ, the first thing I'm interested in is what is their appetite for risk. And that now I realise that involves the technical side as well as the acting side. But yeah, I think that's, like Socrates says, know thyself. So if you don't know what kind of work you think you're going to develop or you are developing, then you can't really find potential partners or potential outlets for that work. And it's hopeless to be, loose about that. Like, we can do everything. I can do funny shows, I can do dinner, I can do convivial meet and greet shows, I can do, I can dance naked with, a pig wrapped around me. It's like, well, what do you want to do? That's too much. This is what I do. Okay, but there's doing and being interested in things, which is different, and aspirations, I suppose. I think, you might go, well, I know that I can do this. I kind of have these ill-formed aspirations, but I suppose, I was driven by I certainly felt driven by, this is a weird thing to say, by a kind of abiding interest in a kind of philosophy, if you like, of Marx and stuff. So I needed to go there, and but you might be driven by all sorts of things. That's that. I'm not saying that because it sounds grandiose and it sounds ludicrous now, doesn't it? I was really interested in alienation because I was massively alienated as a person. But it could be ranged from Cuba to rice manufacture in Shenzhen to refugees in the Greek islands or anything. But if you don't really have much passion for anything, it's quite hard to shave a theatre company or organisation out of your little piece of wood that you're there in your bedsit or in your house flat, going, this is what I am, and carrying it somewhere. You know, and I guess, of course, it's all right not to know. Crikey, I'm not saying, you know, but that's the journey you're on, I suppose, a discovery of knowing, which is why one goes. Interestingly enough, not only is there more talking now, but there's less workshops. But in the olden days, there were a load of workshops where you kind of get your creative juices going. So not only were there performances, but I think there were more workshops where you'd also, as Simon was saying, meet and go, hey, I like what you did there. Do you do other stuff like that? So I think keeping your eyes open for that is important. The flip side of it, obviously, though, is you know, if you're you know, occasionally wander in the valley of opaqueness, you know, so you're in your bedroom going, oh God, what am I going to do? Well, what kind of artist am I? You know, and you stay like that for weeks and weeks. Maybe that's okay, because when you finally don't inhabit the world of opaqueness, what you still might not know what you're doing, but you might go, actually, I know what I don't want to do. You know, I don't want to do naturalistic 3-act cowards, or, you know, I don't want to do stupid things with Paul down in Swansea with Cole, you know, and that's good. You know, even if you're not in a position of being able to articulate where it is and what it is you want to do as an artist, where your real skill set is, then maybe not being able to define what you don't want to do within the gamut of possibilities is positive, I think, really positive, which is how we started. You know, so we made, you know, Phil and I made numerous hideously primitive shows, worse even, can you imagine, than our current shows, that really were just against the kind of formal naturalism that was, narrative naturalism that was prevalent at the time. Okay, that's enough of that, isn't it? Is that any more questions? You can just say stop talking about that, Simon. You can say talk about positive, supportive things. I'll go, oh, right, okay. I'll just get my notes. No, right. Before we talk about eroding, I just want to go back to this kind of open door thing, because it is important. Just because we're not, you know, we haven't been nominally in charge of a building for long, really, for 3.5 years, and only since January here. This is a bigger space than across the way there, and it you know, I was saying to Simon just now, it can be quite difficult because, you know, you're having a meeting and someone just wanders in, you know, and says, "What's going on here then?" And it's very, you know, you're like, "What are these pictures?" And you go, "It's not pictures, it's just a white wall." Where are the pictures then? And you kind of go, "Well, they're coming up." And so that's quite tricky. But the flip side is you do get, you know, as I said, this old lady came in and gave us me manuscripts, but 10 days ago a lass came in who's doing a creative writing course and has just come back to Swansea, and I'm doing this kind of youth project, and I said, oh, well, why don't you come and sit in and see if you can write some stuff. So it's kind of that's kind of basically partly how we work. You know, if someone comes in and says, hey, can I do this? Then if there's a space, you know, then we say, yeah, do it. I mean, I've never read anything this girl's ever written. I have no idea. She didn't turn up the first time. I was like, oh, right, okay. I was just writing to her now. I guess that's part of the accident thing I was talking about. But for me, it's, I guess, it kind of relates to, you know, if one part of the deal for becoming I don't want to say becoming an artist, is know thyself. The other thing is, you have to know not where you're going in terms of a life trajectory, but know the building or know the offer you're making to the building. So people who come in here and want to do something, they need to know what this place is like, because we're not funded to present a program of activity. We're funded to make our own work, and we don't have a technician, for example. So without light trap crew and no doubt you know how to do all of this yourselves. This couldn't happen. So which is again why I think having actors, writers, directors, whoever they are, who can do stuff for me, or do stuff for them. Say, look, I need to build a wooden frame because it's about Picasso. And I go, well, build it. There's some hammer and nails. If you can't use a hammer and nails and you're in your mid-30s, then, what have you been doing all life? I don't know. I've been writing. Well, writers can do things, same as actors. So it's about the expectations of a real building, and I think that absolutely is across the board. Whether you're going into Chapter or you're going to a tobacco factory or coming here or you're in Clewidge, you have to. It pays to know where you are and what that building is can do for you or can't. Because then you can be realistic about, what you're going to do. So that's something we're kind of interested in as people who run this. The other thing, I suppose, in terms of artists that's important for me and here and the locality is the connections that we have with it used to be called Swansea Met, but the second university up there, and say Royal Welsh, or so. I think being connected to institutions that are in the business of teaching, whether it's probably, this high. Well, the youth thing we're doing now is from 13 to 21, so it's schools or conservatoires. So we're interested in knowing those places, making connections with them. So that's an obvious thing, really, to know who's out there, and partly because obviously they can provide you with opportunities, maybe, but also you can go, hey, you're not doing this, you should be doing this. For example, physical literacy in Wales. I mean, it's like it doesn't really happen. What is physical literacy? It's sort of connected to phenomenology. It's sort of connected to Margaret Whitehead, wrote a famous book about it. Maybe that's why most of us are like this. Right, I've got a speech to do. So anyway, that's important, I think. The already existing institutions, because it isn't. It's not. Even, I must be very difficult. Luckily, I've never been in the position of being, or unluckily, a solo artist. I've always had coalesced around a group of people, but I think you're not, and it's not existential situation you're in, because the area, the field is already populated, obviously, with, most especially with NTW, who, prior to them, networking in Wales, didn't really exist, I don't think, probably. Or I'm sure some people say it did, Paul. But, it's super important. So, I thought someone might say no, it isn't. But there you are. Just leaving a gap in case anyone wants to contradict me. Right, have I got anything else to say? Right, there you are. One other thing to say. Well, a few more. The other thing that so knowing the building, knowing the context, knowing the social structure or whatever it is, whatever you want to call it. For example, we're running a thing now at the moment called IPP, which is called Ideas, People's Places. It's a Arts Council of Wales thing that we got some money for, and it's done in conjunction with Coastal over there. But it's a very it isn't about theatre. It's about people and places in this street, and it means that we've got to talk to and are engaged in projects with architects, health professionals, and just a very wide range of professionals that aren't exclusively by any means related or connected to the arts. So I think that's something that's becoming significant and important, that the areas of work where creativity has a place to play has become far more widely recognised, thank goodness, in Wales and elsewhere. And I think that's super important. It isn't all about being on a stage, is it? There's really important work to be done there, and I think from education to health to architecture to the lived space, if I was starting again, that's where I'd start looking for interesting projects, because especially as the appetite for risk in the built theatre community has diminished. I think ironically the appetite for risk outside of the discourse of theatre is increased. So that's my tip, it's like a horse racing tip, that one. It's a bit, a bit something. Anyway,
we've got a question on the live stream.
Oh, right.
They've asked, have you got any tips on diversifying funding through European sources?
Oh, God. Can they ask anything easier?
No, I'll check.
Yeah, well, tips on that. Well, funnily you should say that. I think I am speaking on it about Europe here and in North Wales soon, because we've got some recently experience of, we've been involved in a trans-European 10-project partner funded application through the, I don't know what I think it's called the Capital Programme. Anyone know anything about Europe? Capital Programme. There you are. Which was a show that we did, and we had to select a writer or a performer. Couldn't get a writer involved, so we got this performer who joined a bunch of other performers from Hungary, a French Congolese actor, a French actor, a Belgian actor. Anyway, they did a show, and it travelled all around Europe, and it ended up here 2 weeks ago and finished here. And well, my advice would be to connect with organisations in the IETM. So that's my advice, and to make sure they go to the news round. There's what IETM is held. The next one's in Hungary, Budapest, 5th to the 8th of November. You can get cheap flights to Budapest. I don't know about the train if you don't want to fly. But there you'd meet companies that are putting in applications, or would go, hey, we want an actress or an actor, or there's two schemes. There's a European Capital. Did I say European Capital Fund?
Part of the European Commission, was linked to the European Commission funding.
Yeah. There's two. The other scheme is Erasmus.
It's like a new thing. It's like got a new name.
Yeah, the other scheme's Erasmus, and we've just got an application in called Pole Art, political art, and we've got an application in for that. So it's really complicated. To lead on one of these applications is horrendous. Yeah, it's probably you need a team of people. But the first one we ran with Transplanosphere, that was £250,000. And the weird thing about the application, I have to say, was, which is why, actually, interestingly enough, Simon, today you've started with money and accountability. It was precisely mirrors what happens in this European application. The actual project description was like on page 199. Everything was about, the payment schedules, and it was bewildering. But there is money out there. I'm optimistic about that, but I think Wales needs to get to European meetings where you can meet like-minded artists and people. There's another one. There's another one heading up in Finland at the moment that we're slightly involved in as well.
I think there's like a whole list, isn't there, on the European Commission website. There's a great big long list of all the different funders that you can apply, or there's a list.
The best person to speak to is Catherine Cook, who's in the Wales Government Office. She's based in Cardiff, and she's running 2 seminars, one in North Wales and one in South Wales this month and next month. And she's super, far more than me, I know you won't believe me, expert at both understanding and presenting these schemes, and that's her job, to get more Welsh organisations out there applying for them. Okay, that was a good question. If they're any easier, that would be grand, you know. I feel like slightly undercooked in my response to that. But for me, it is the lifeblood of theatre practice. Really, is connecting to other cultures and other people. And I think that there's only so long you can look at your own navel, look at your own lump of coal before you kind of run out of. You need other people's coal to look at. I mean, I know Kira's just come back from Amsterdam, who's our eroding thing and artist this year. She might want to talk about that. Okay, let's talk about this little scheme that we run at Erodin. Most organisations in Wales have a kind of youth artist scheme or some kind of young artist scheme, which is an entry point, I'd say. It's the 3rd year we've run it. It's what's it for? Why is it? I don't know. Basically, you get a bit of mentoring, which crosses various disciplines, from marketing to administration to coaching from Fern Smith, and some money. You get not very much. You get 500 quid, and also the opportunity to rehearse something if you want to here. And well, the idea is just to get more. Is to try and address the fact that without younger companies developing, theatre is kind of a demographic that might be heading in the wrong direction, or might just be something people do when they're up to their 25, maybe a bit older, and stop. So, but also we found it, kind of invaluable insofar as it brings something back to us. So this year's Erodin, one of the candidates is presenting a piece as part of the November Fest that we're running, an 8-day festival of dance, performance, film stuff here, and maybe Kira, who's made a piece and presented it in a Wee Amsterdam festival, will present her piece too. So we started off thinking we wanted to give 2 artists. Sorry, it's a 2-artist fund application process. You just write 2 pages, and it was heavily process orientated. We didn't want to, the first 2 years, we didn't want to shift the emphasis to there must be outcomes that are strongly performative, but we kind of shifted it slightly to encourage people to think about the time they spend with us as having a performative outcome. So this year, both applicants, successful applicants, have got pieces to present to the public. Josh Alan Trask hasn't presented anything. He starts working on it next week, and Kira's presented something in Amsterdam, and a work in progress here in August. We have about 20 applicants each year for this. The previous year we had a really strong cohort of people who'd failed but wanted to stick together and have a conversation together. One of the things that we found in terms of young artists in this part of Wales was there's a lack of lack of conversations really. So there was really a lack of a network or just meeting points. So they just wanted to stick together both digitally and physically and present. They presented I don't know, about 4 or 5 hours of work across the road. So that seems to be a big issue. In terms of criteria for selection, obviously most of the things that we think about is what people are trying to achieve, and we just asked you to write about that. But the other thing is, I feel quite strongly that people who already have connections to institutions or organisations, whether it's universities or other companies, or have already kind of temporarily embedded themselves, let's say in the team NTW thing, I would prefer them to have more, not to have achieved that sort of place, so it's more people who are kind of, in the land of opaqueness. They're the ones that I felt that they need to be connected to some organisation and then perhaps to some other people. So they were, and they're still for me the people that we need to assist. And I guess I feel kind of passionate about this, and and in a similar sense, we've got a youth theatre project running here now, which will present something on sport and art in November. Because I don't know whether it's because we're the second city of Wales, and the ecology of arts practice isn't as formed as Cardiff, or so for me that's part of what this building should be about. If I'd love it if someone else said, look, come, Paul, I'll run your youth theatre. I'm going, oh no, I'm gonna have to do it myself. Okay. Yeah, it's kind of less talking and more doing. I suppose this maybe, if anything, for me, if there's anything to take from anything I've said here, which you may well doubt, it is that once you've got some thinking out of the way, you have to do. We're kind of, that's why we have these hands and feet and mouths to do stuff. I think, is that enough? Could be, couldn't it?
That's great.
So,
do you know if you'll be running a Rodin again next year, and
yeah,
when people could get in touch with their project?
Practical questions. Excellent. Yeah, there are deadlines. Most of this, I'm sure, will be on our website, and I've seen it, the deadlines, but January. There's a deadline of January. It's a 2-page A4 submission. The process opens on the 9th of January and it finishes on the 6th of February. And it's a 6-month scheme. And I think it might be the 24th. The 27th of November. This next month will be the presentation, certainly, of Josh Allen Trask's heroic journey through Wales, and possibly Kira's presentation. That's this year's Rodin candidates' presentation of her piece about the pernicious influence of Catholicism upon her. I think it's something like that, isn't it? Yeah. So yeah, please apply. Please, if anyone's interested, out there, please apply.
Great.
Cool.
Any last questions from people here or elsewhere? Here or
It's all gone quiet.
We'll
Good.
pause around for the rest of the
Yeah.
afternoon for an hour or so.
Yeah.
Lots of people who loved being part of the cohort. Donna Males and Rebecca Louise Collins. So it's nice.
Lots of love.
Good.
Lots of love.
Good. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Paul.
Good. No, thank you. Grand. Thanks. Thank you.